Nicole Auerbach, we appreciate your time. NBC national columnist, covers college football with us. Craig and Paul, David Smoke on 365 Sports. Nicole, you were very vocal after the standings came out on Tuesday and about hypotheses and hypotheticals, etc. How was the reaction to what you said? Because we all, I think, across the board pretty much agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody who doesn't root for a team in the SEC feels that way. I think that a lot of people have been very tired of hearing that, losses can be excused based on a strength of schedule, which, by the way, like strength of schedule metrics are calculated differently for each different outlet in different places. But, it's kind of like the idea, like I saw somebody arguing about like Missouri still being in the top 25, which shocked me. That they had a strong strength of schedule. Well, but they got blown out in the 3 games that they lost, right? So at some point, like drawing a tough schedule on paper shouldn't be the number one thing anyone says about you. It should be how you played against the teams on your schedule. And I just, it was just frustrating to see Indiana become the flashpoint for all of this when they have a big game against Ohio State left. I mean, they have a game that will make or break their season, and we don't have to get hypothetical about that. I think it's hard for people to hear when, you grow up in a region or you root for a certain team and you believe that the teams in that area are always the best of the best when, maybe there isn't an elite team in the SEC this year. They're all kind of beating up on each other a little bit. And even Georgia, a team that I think we believe in the coaching staff and the talent there were about 6 weeks where Carson Beck was playing really poorly and they didn't look very good. So I just think that those things need to matter, and that I thought that after last year with what happened to Florida State, winning all their games and not getting into the playoffs, we were told that wouldn't happen again. But a lot of the conversations and kind of the vitriol against teams like Indiana or Penn State, and surprisingly not Texas, because their schedule is very similar as well, a lot of it feels the same as what happened last year in the conversations about Florida State versus Alabama for that last spot. I think ultimately it kind of comes down to the idea of deserving versus best. And I just don't believe that we should just pick the best teams based on, who is the most 5-star recruits or how we thought about them back in August.
Nicole, you said something in there. The SEC doesn't have an elite team. They may know that. They'll never admit that. I think the party line has been, we have 6 elite teams, and our elite teams are so elite it doesn't matter when they lose. Is that part of it because they just won't admit that, like, hey, maybe this year isn't the year for the SEC like the past years have been?
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely not admitting that. And again, I mean, I'm not saying that like a team from the SEC is not going to win it all. We haven't gone through the 12-team playoff yet, but there's additional games, the wear and tear, the teams that are most talented and have the most depth are going to have the best shot to win it all. So I'm not saying that an SEC team won't win it, but I do think when you get down to like the 5th and 6th best teams, it's just kind of an interesting conversation to have because we're already looking at brackets for the last few weeks now, and basically all season that projects 4 SEC teams in. I feel like if you're the 5th or 6th best team in your own conference, hard to argue that like, oh my God, you have to be in the bracket to determine the national champion because you could be the best team in the entire country when you're 5th or 6th in your own league. It's just like, that doesn't compute to me.
It just means more, I guess, Nicole. It just means more. It's all I can think of. But you mentioned Indiana, and they are in Columbus this weekend for that monster showdown. I know there's a lot of conversation about if they lose, are they still in and all that, but what do you think about just their chances straight up against the Buckeyes, and what do you think about just the story building there in the Big Ten in Columbus this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, it's a game that we've all had circled for a few weeks now. I think once we got past the point of, hey, Indiana, it's a great little story, and they're like, actually, they're pretty good, and they're pretty much crushing everybody they play, except Michigan. Of course, that was a much tighter game. So I can't wait to see it play out. I do understand, why Ohio State is a big favorite here. It's by far the most talented team that Indiana is facing. I've seen a lot of people kind of frame it as like the no stars versus the 5 stars. Completely true. All of that is accurate. And Indiana did struggle against the one team in Michigan that has dudes that are going to play on Sunday. That defensive front is for real, even though they're having a disappointing season. So I'm going to be fascinated to see, how this one gets started. Ohio State tends to start slow in some of their games. Can Indiana kind of jump into the game that way and stay and hang around. Curtis Rourke, I think, is really good. I could see him, making an NFL team and sticking around in that league as a backup quarterback for a long time. He's really efficient, really accurate. But I mean, how are they going to, protect him and try to run the ball? What is their defensive front going to be able to do against Ohio State, which there is an interesting dynamic here with their starting center going down and out for the rest of the year. Second significant offensive lineman to go down for them. Does that create an opportunity for Indiana's pass rush and some ability there for the defense to disrupt the game? So I think there's pathways for this thing to be close, for it to be interesting. And I think, I probably fall in the camp of people who say, that they probably do need to have a competitive showing in this game if they lose to stay in the CFP race. So I'd love to see it be a close game. I would love to see us learn a lot about Indiana and about Ohio State by this being a tight one. But yeah, if it becomes a blowout in one direction, it would certainly be Ohio State's. Just the amount of talent that they've had, start to finish. You talked about the $20 million that went into the NIL to keep and to build this roster. So fascinating matchup. I love that it is going to be November 23rd, and Indiana is in the biggest game of the day.
Yeah, it's a great story, and it might end up being even a better story. What they've done is maul people. There are 4 of the top 5 teams in America as far as the rankings, not the standings, the college football standings, who are from the Big Ten. With Oregon, of course, part of that mix. Ohio State, Penn State are old guard, especially Ohio State, and Indiana is in the mix too. When you look at the Big Ten, they have 4 wins. Those 4 teams have 4 wins. They're 4-2 against teams ranked inside the Associated Press. Who of those 4 do you feel like, if there's someone that shouldn't be there, who would it be? Would it be Penn State or Indiana?
I mean, I would put in Penn State there right now, and I would do this for one reason. I mean, I think that Penn State is a very good football team, but they had one game and they lost it, right? And that was going to be their resume, boosting, their signature win, the anchor of their resume. So I am a little confused at how high they are ranked without any great signature wins. It's the same thing I feel about Texas as well. I mean, I think they're good teams, and I don't mean to say that they're not. And they have played, decent teams. But with the way that the committee evaluates and what they tell us they consider significant markers and resumes, it's like top 25 wins, like against the teams that they put in their top 25. And so it's just confusing. Like, I still don't understand, why Georgia is 7 spots behind Texas and why they're so different just based on 1 losses versus 2 losses when there was a significant result between the two, and Georgia has 2 top 20 wins. So I put Penn State in that same category where, and it's the way the schedule fell, that they had one big game and they didn't win it. But it feels like they're getting a lot of credit for it being a good loss, whereas other teams were kind of like holding them to account for, actually having those big wins that are anchoring the resume. So Penn State would be that one for me of those teams. And I also just think Indiana has been more consistent across the board. But that could certainly change depending on how we see Indiana play Ohio State, a team that we already saw Penn State go against.
Nicole, what are your thoughts on, when we've talked about the excellent teams in this league, but Michigan, you mentioned them a second ago, and they still have dudes on how does Sharon Moore get there with whiffing on evaluating the 3 quarterbacks that they had on the roster and not just going, we might as well get somebody else in here to try to drive the ship that still has some really good players on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a fascinating off season for him. And, there's obviously, been a lot of news about, recruiting and efforts to flip a different specific quarterback. But I think that this is going to be the big test, right? Because the coaching change happened so late last year. Michigan was also in the mix of, the CFP race and fighting and planning ahead to a semifinal. And then the championship game, which obviously you could, sign a new quarterback. You could work through some of that stuff during December. But, J.J. McCarthy hadn't officially declared and there was other stuff going on. So I give him a little bit of a pass. And honestly, a lot of that falls on Jim Harbaugh as well, because this would have been his quarterback situation had he not left for the NFL. So that's why I think that this offseason, from the day the season ends onward, is all on Sharon Moore. He can make staffing changes if he needs to. He can approach recruiting differently, talent evaluation differently, but he doesn't have to do it in a compressed time frame right at the end of a national championship run into, half a staff leaving to go to the NFL. So that's why I think, it's hard to evaluate and how much is on his fault and his shoulders versus, his offensive coordinator versus Harbaugh versus, other talent evaluators on the roster or on the staff. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and wait and see what he does this offseason in the portal and with high school recruiting.
Nicole, I know that the Big 12 is not top of mind for most people, but it is a league right now that, has a very interesting title race shaping up. At the same time, probably some concerns as far as the postseason goes. How concerned do you think the Big 12 should be about the CFP after BYU took that loss? And what stands out to you about the league, if anything, from this season so far?
Well, this weekend, two monster games that will be taking place at the same time, which I think is awesome. And I think that the Big 12 has some of the best stories in sport. I still think Indiana is probably number one, but Colorado 2, Arizona State 3, with the remarkable turnarounds that we've seen from them. And I think that adds something to these matchups, especially, with Kansas knocking off 2 top 20 teams in the past 2 weeks. And then BYU bounced back up against a team that basically the entire country realized, has had this remarkable turnaround. The country got to know Kenny Dillingham if they weren't aware of him yet, all in the past week. So much of attention and interest and stuff is storylines, and these two matchups certainly have them. And I think it's going to be awesome and close games as well. But yeah, I think you've got to be a little bit concerned. We've been talking about it for weeks that the Big 12 was tracking towards only getting one team in, just the champion. And the ACC is kind of there too. They're a little bit better positioned with where Miami fell to after its loss and with SMU around there as well. But it's hard to get a full read on it. I know some people freak out about seeing BYU in that number 4 seed and getting that first round bye. That is certainly a possibility, but we just don't know how the committee is going to handle, these results from this weekend, or what it would mean, let's say Colorado goes out and wins the Big 12 championship, and the series of teams that they would play, how the committee would evaluate those wins, how what their ceiling could be from a ranking perspective. It's hard to guess. It's hard to estimate that without seeing it, but it's definitely a concern that, if you do have some upsets or a 3-loss conference champion, that you could be outside of the top 4 seeds and not get that bye. I do think that is a possibility.
Nicole, in the NFL, if you win a division, you're going to get a home game, and most likely there's a chance you can get a bye in the first round, but you can't get in just because the name on your jersey or how rich the owner might be. You have to earn it. And I use that because it's not the NFL and college football, but now 12 teams getting in. There are 5 qualifiers, automatic, the 5 highest-ranked conference champions. Do you think the push by, it appears to be Greg Sankey, I'm not so sure yet about the Big Ten, that, maybe them too, that they should get multiple automatic qualifiers? Is that a good idea, and why, if you think it is?
Yeah, I think that conversation is going to continue, and I think what we're seeing with the conversation around the 2-loss teams in the SEC, and Greg Sankey himself tweeted out some strength of schedule metrics earlier today. I think they have been laying the groundwork for that. I went to that meeting that the 2 conferences had with their athletic directors in Nashville a couple months ago, and asked, they kept saying, we want to see how the first year of the playoff goes and what, how the committee goes. And I was like, well, what specifically are you looking at? And they're looking at the seating, they're looking at the selection, the inclusion. But I think that is what they're trying to determine. If they don't think that the committee is giving their teams the respect that they think they deserve based on how they're scheduled, and that the coaches are going to freak out about taking too many losses and not making the playoff or not wanting to play for a conference champion, as we've heard Lane Kiffin talk about, I think that's just a nightmare scenario for these conferences. And they like the idea of multiple automatic bids that are not up for, the human element, and not having a selection committee determining that. That would protect your conference championship game, because then you could say both teams that make it get in. Doesn't matter if it's your 3rd loss, 4th loss, whatever it is for the team that loses it. If you get 3 AQs, then you could have a third place game to play into the playoff. Like, they can market and build a lot around that, and it takes away the question of, this uncertainty of having humans on a selection committee making this decision. So I think that, no other sport has the multiple AQs for different leagues like the way that it does, that they're proposing. But I think that they have enough power in an ability to change the format that they could get this done even if it's unpopular, which I think it would be to almost all college football fans, and certainly those fans in other conferences. But the reason that we need to pay attention to how the losers of the conference championship games are getting treated, and then how, the evaluation of some of the SEC teams with the multiple losses are, even though, again, they're already going to get 4 teams into the bracket. But you need to pay attention to the language, pay attention to the treatment of that from the committee, because that could ratchet up that rhetoric and that push from those commissioners for change after the season, depending on how it goes down here over the next few weeks.
Nicole, why would they risk? I mean, I know that they have the juice and all that stuff, but why risk angering over half the potential audience?
I mean, I think that this is a world that we live in where conference commissioners are, thinking about what's best for their conferences. And they believe that is what's best for them. And they are looking at, again, potential new revenue streams. If you had a third place game, or you change some things around, like the race for your conference champion, more intrigue down the stretch, if there's automatic bids on the line, or protecting the SEC championship game in Atlanta, which is very valuable to the conference as well. So they're thinking about what's best for their teams. And I think that's, what they are doing first and foremost. And that's where college football is. When you have leadership, you don't really have centralized leadership, and you've had years of realignment and poaching and taking each other's schools and operating on everyone's own best self-interest. And so I think, for as collegial as they can be in certain ways as a whole from, the Power Four or across all of FBS, everyone's been acting in their own self-interest for the last, let's say 4 years, going back to COVID decisions when money was tight, and then obviously realignment as well. So there's no real, incentive to do anything other than that. And I think that, that's kind of the world we're in, and you can continue to threaten a breakaway fully or whatever it might look like. But you could also just basically be these mega conferences, be these super conferences in the current system, and just have more power, have more access than everybody else, and they're accomplishing the goals that they want. So you don't have people overlooking the sport that are looking out for the greater good or competitive balance. You have people who are in charge of their own conferences who are making decisions based on what's best for their own league. And, maybe it's been a while since people were making decisions that went against maybe their own self-interest for the greater good. And I just don't know what it would take to get back to that. But right now, I'm not surprised that it's happening where, the people with the most power are making decisions that would benefit them directly. And again, they haven't changed it yet. But if they were to, I think that they would handle the backlash, because it would be what's best for their conferences, and they would have the support from within their leagues.
Nicole, my last question for you is Notre Dame and Army this weekend. I noticed in your Twitter feed that you spent the day at West Point, which is absolutely a gorgeous drop-dead place like any of the military academies, the Annapolis or even Colorado Springs. What was that like for you?
Yeah, it was awesome. I'd been there before, but I'd really only been to the football facility and to the football stadium. So we had spent the day with one of the senior defensive backs, and he kind of showed us around and taught us the history of different points and moments and some of the trophies and memorials around the post, which is what they call their campus. And then we also got to see them get in formation, go into the mess hall, just some of the daily traditional elements of being a cadet. So it was an awesome experience. And, it's really cool to get to tell those types of stories. Obviously, Army is undefeated. And I think, we wanted to do something like that for our Peacock pregame show for the Notre Dame Army game. But now that it's, a huge, huge game, it's even more special to get to tell those stories. And, one thing that also really comes across when you go to there or to Navy is everything is about the Army Navy game. I mean, you go in the football facility and it says beat Navy everywhere. And it's just really cool. I mean, we've lost so much. We've lost and regained, or lost completely certain rivalries and some traditional elements of college football. So it's really cool to be around one like that, and that game means so much. So yeah, it was awesome. Games at Yankee Stadium on Saturday, which is a fun little backdrop for it. But that is going to be that has some real stakes for both teams in it, and I can't wait to watch it.
Yeah, how much? And I said my last question, but if just in case we're talking about hypotheticals, and this is too, can you imagine if college football might just implode if Army and Indiana won this weekend?
I know. I mean, all these people that have been arguing about strength of schedules, their heads might explode, because I think this keeps certain dreams alive of Indiana being in the playoff. Certainly would lock them in. But Army's got a real shot too. Again, it depends what happens with the Mountain West and some of these other conference races down the stretch. But that would really be something if Army were to secure a berth in the CFP the week before Army-Navy, and then continue on in the CFP. So that's what the sport is. Great. It's fun. It's surprising. It's interesting. You never know, what you're going to be talking about in November. And so that's what I think we need to celebrate, and not just try to poo-poo teams like in Indiana because their schedule wasn't what you wanted it to be.
Yeah, let the games play out and see what happens. Hopefully we do get the 12 based on what they do on the field. Thank you so much, Nicole. Congratulations on what you're doing at NBC. Glad you had that opportunity. We appreciate your time.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Nicole Auerbach with NBC Sports on many things when it comes to the college football standings.